Hi all, I'm Danya Divagar. Once again a warm welcome to my channel Shades of Literature. A big thanks to all for subscribing my channel and also for leaving your valuable comments in my comment box. So today I'll be doing a concept, Post Colonial literature. So why do we learn this post colonial literature? Have you ever thought about it? It's just that to make us familiarize or to make us understand more about the colonial rule and the impact which the colonial rule left over in their colonies. That is why we learn post-colonial literature. So students as prospective researchers and as prospective students, we all should be able to know more about the colonial impact. So now you got a term colonial. What do you mean by colonialism? So before going into post-colonial literature, I'll be explaining the term post-colonialism. And now what is colonialism? The term colonialism is derived from the Roman word colonia, which means a farm or a settlement. Now the next question would be, what is a settlement? In a settlement, people generally they used to move in large groups from one locality to another locality, and they used to settle down in those places. But even after settling down, they used to keep their connectivity with their parent state or their mother country. So this is known as a settlement. So after they settle in certain places, there used to be two kinds of people. So now the next connection or the next two terms which I'll be explaining would be these two kinds of people. The first kind is the settlers who came from other places and they settled in new localities. They are known as the settlers. And the next kind of people would be the real inhabitants or the real natives who were staying in their land. So you have two kinds of people here, the settlers and the inhabitants. And now the next thing would be these settlers and inhabitants, they are addressed by different terms. Whenever you read any literary narrative or any text for that matter, you will come across different terminologies or different terms which we use to address these settlers as well as inhabitants or the natives. So such terminologies are, for settlers we use colonial powers, colonisers, and for inhabitants we use terms such as natives, savage, primitive, barbarians. So these are the terms. Also we use indigenous people, aboriginals. So all these terms are referred or are used to address inhabitants or the native people. Native in the sense they are the real owners of the land. Now the next question would be, what kind of relationship did the settlers as well as the owners of the land, the inhabitants or the natives, what kind of relationship did they share? The relationship which they shared was a traumatic one. To know more about the relationship shared by the settlers and the natives, we need to know about the term colonialism. So initially when I started my class, I just mentioned the word meaning of the term colonialism, from which word the term was derived. I didn't explain much about the term. So now what is colonialism? Colonialism is an alleged way of exploitation of the weaker sections of a community or a locality by a supreme power. So obviously when someone exploits your freedom, when someone exploits your culture, tradition, and when someone exploits your land, what happens? There starts an unrest and unhappiness. So when there is an unrest and unhappiness, obviously this will lead to tension. So this was the main reason for a traumatic kind of relationship between the settlers and the natives. And now what would this unrest lead to? This unrest would lead to another question. What is it? Why did these people or why did the settlers colonize? This is the first question which you should keep in mind when you write something about colonialism. Why did they colonize? The answer was given by them to us, to the natives or to the inhabitants. The answer is this: they wanted to reform and reframe the communities into which they came as settlers. They wanted to reform and give better life to the inhabitants over there. The settlers, they thought that the inhabitants are savage people, they are primitive, they doesn't have any knowledge about etiquettes and manners, so they wanted to reform and reframe the community to which they came. So this was the simple answer given by the settlers. First question was, why did they colonize? Now the second question is, what is the main purpose? For what purpose did they colonize places? So the answer would be very simple. The answer is that the colonizers, or the supreme powers, the people who had power with them, they had lots of money. Money was there, but they didn't had something else which we had. They didn't had manpower and enough resources. So they came to all those places where they could find manpower and resources, and they started making their colonies over there. The third question would be, what did these settlers do with these resources? They just plundered and looted their colonies and made profit out of these resources. And where would this profit go into? This profit went into their motherland, the motherland of the settlers. And now the inhabitants, or the natives, the indigenous people, they were left over with nothing in their hands. Everything was looted and plundered. But when these settlers came into these new places and made their colonies over there, the natives, the inhabitants, they had everything with them. They had their own culture, their tradition, their values, everything was there. But all these were taken by the settlers, and what did they give us in return? They just gave nothing. Everything was plundered and we were left over with nothing in our hands. And now comes the question of imperialism. What is this imperialism? Imperialism is the stepping stone to colonization. And by imperialism, the term imperialism means the supreme power, giving or attaining supremacy over a colony in all ways. That means politically, economically, militarily, by all means gaining supremacy over a colony or over a place. Now this imperialism serves to be the stepping stone to colonialism. And coming back to the term post-colonialism, what does post-colonialism mean? The term post means aftermath, and post-colonialism means aftermath of colonial rule. So what is the main aim of post-colonial studies? Now we are just slowly coming to post-colonial literature. What is the main aim of post-colonialism? The main aim of post-colonialism is the academic study of the cultural legacy of imperialism and colonialism. It also focuses on the exploitation or the consequences of these exploitation by the settlers, and also teaches us something about the consequences of the control which these settlers had on these colonies. So this is all about the main aim of post-colonialism. Now coming to post-colonial literature, which is very important for a literature student. It's very important for us to know what does the term post-colonial literature mean. So the answer is there. Post-colonial literature, those literatures which came from the countries which were once colonized. So whatever literature came from those countries which were once colonized by the colonizers, such literature is clubbed under the category of post-colonial literature. Now, have you ever thought about how did post-colonial literatures happen, or how did people started writing? The answer is, during colonial rule, or when settlers came in and when they settled in certain places, what happened was the settlers as well as the original inhabitants of the land, they started moving from one place to another. So initially when I started the session, I gave you a small explanation about the settlers and the inhabitants. Who are they? So settlers are those who settled in their colonies, and the inhabitants are those people who owned the land. They are the original natives of the land. So when the settlers came in and settled, both these groups, they started moving from one place to another. You should keep in mind the nature of their movement was different. The settlers moved from one place to another seeking jobs. They moved as in search of jobs such as advocates, doctors, administrators, etc. But when it comes to the inhabitants or the natives, they moved as slaves, or rather they were deported from their land to another place. So the movement was different for these two peoples. The nature of the movement was different. And now when these inhabitants were deported and the settlers went in search of jobs, what happened was new writings started up. Initially, I told you the settlers, they looted, plundered and killed people from those colonized places. So as a result of this killing and looting, the indigenous people or the natives, they started to give it back to the settlers with their pen. They started writing literary forms in terms of pamphlets, diary entries, small notings in their books, in small bits of papers, even wall paintings. So they started to give it back to these settlers with their pen. So that is how new literary forms happened. So now any post-colonial text, what does it look for, or what is the main aim of any post-colonial text? It looks at explaining, or rather focusing on the oppression, the suppression and the adaptiveness which the people or the inhabitants of the over that place, how did they adapt to such circumstances. So all these would be explained in a post-colonial text. In order to relate with this colonial rule, I can give you an example. We can take the very example of our country, India, how we were colonized. So now the first people to come to India were the Portuguese. A person named Vasco da Gama came. He came to a place called Calicut, that is in Kerala, in 1497. After Portuguese, the Dutch came, then Britishers, then Arabs, Mughals, all these people came to India. Why did they come? They came in the name of trade, or that is what they made us believe. But this trade thing was camouflaged totally by them. And then what did they do? They just plundered and looted the colonies to which they went. And now thinking about the places to which these people went and settled, when you take the whole globe, almost the whole globe or the whole world was colonized except Antarctica. And exploitation, you should understand that exploitation is not merely political exploitation. It is exploitation by all means in terms of culture, tradition, economic exploitation, militarily, politically. So exploitation by means of all aspects. Each and every colony was exploited. And to speak more about this exploitation, even the very psyche of the people were exploited, and even now we are still carrying that impact with us. We are still having that even in this 21st century also. We are still carrying that burden with us. The after effect of this colonization hasn't left from our country or from any colony which were colonized by these colonizers. So even now we are having, or we are facing problems of this exploitation which once happened in our country. So in order to understand more about this exploitation, you need to understand post-colonial theory, and there are many terms which comes under this post-colonial theory. So in my next video, I'll be coming up with a few major theorists and certain key concepts about post-colonial theories. So hope you enjoyed this session. Until then, a big bye from me. Please do take care. Subscribe my channel, leave your valuable comments in my comment box. Also, don't forget to ping on the bell button so that you will get notified whenever I upload a video. Thanks to all.